When I first saw the Avengers Infinity War in theaters, I was struck by a thought. In quite a few different ways, the movie really reminded me of Final Fantasy VI. Both stories are about a diverse group of superpowered people teaming up to take down a maniac with godlike powers and genocidal ambitions. The cast size is pretty similar too. Final Fantasy VI has 14 protagonist characters, if you count people who stay in the party forever. Infinity War has 15 or 16 protagonist characters if you count active Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Doctor Strange. Though that said, in both stories there are some ancillary characters that fight on the side of the good guys that you could count, like Okoye, Bucky, and Wong in Infinity War, and Ban and Leo and the Moogles in Final Fantasy VI. But regardless of whom you count, the cast sizes are pretty similar. There's also a lot of overlap in superhero archetypes between the two stories. Both stories have a mild-mannered character who transforms into a being of superhuman power. Both stories feature women raised to be super soldiers that turn against the man who trained them. The de facto leader of both casts is a highly talented engineer with a thing for the ladies. Both casts feature a chatty professional thief in love with an emotionally distant ally. Both casts feature a significantly younger team member with animal-themed powers. And both casts feature an honor-bound warrior on a quest to avenge the loss of his family. But the thing that really struck me as similar was the structure of the two stories. Specifically, it's how both stories managed their large casts of characters. Before I saw Infinity War, I was worried that the movie wouldn't be able to juggle all of its competing storylines. How could one movie manage to give equitable screen time and impact to all those heroes? Even the original Avengers film wasn't always able to strike that balance. But Infinity War actually did a great job with giving most of its very large cast a moment to shine. And it did so in the same way that Final Fantasy VI did, by making the villain the main character. Now, for those of you who don't watch a lot of videos about game design, let me take a step back and explain who I am and what I do. My name is Patrick Holloman, and for most of the past decade I've been studying video games quantitatively. That basically means I use math and graphs to explain how classic video games were made. I wrote a book called Reverse Design Final Fantasy VI, and one of the most important points of that book was that, in order to get a story with 14 main characters to actually function, the game's creators treated its main villain like a main character, or even the main character. I first realized this was happening when I analyzed the game's script. In Final Fantasy VI, Kefka, the main villain of the game, speaks the fourth highest number of words. This is a huge discrepancy from other villains in the series, most of whom don't break the top 5, and many of whom don't even break the top 10 in the games in which they appear. With this statistic in mind, the game's design started to make a lot more sense. Kefka's actions drive the plot of Final Fantasy VI more than anyone or anything else in the game. Kefka is the one who puts the slave crown on Terra, then sends her to retrieve the frozen Esper. Kefka burns Figaro, forcing them into open defiance of the Empire. Kefka poisons the people of Doma, starting Scion's quest for revenge. Kefka brings everyone together to defend Narshe against his invasion. Kefka captures the Espers in Thamasa and murders General Leo. Kefka turns against his only ally and supporter and causes a world-reshaping cataclysm, essentially making everyone in the world his enemy. In other words, Kefka is the one thing that the diverse cast of characters has in common, and his personality is so grandiose and so violent that he can actually pull it off. And that's where Final Fantasy VI really lines up with Infinity War. Kefka and Thanos have a lot in common. For example, just as Kefka speaks the fourth most words in Final Fantasy VI, Thanos speaks the fourth most words in Infinity War. Both antagonists are on a grandiose genocidal mission. Both require the assistance of an ancient cosmic power to achieve that mission. Both of them are willing to kill absolutely anyone in order to achieve their goals. And in both cases, their mission doesn't really make sense to anyone but themselves. In Final Fantasy VI, Kefka gains the ability to wipe out all human life with his Light of Judgment. But he only turns it on a couple of towns. If we stand back and look at Kefka's actions from a distance, it doesn't really seem like he has a specific mission. He likes killing people, but he does so sporadically and not in any systematic way. The consistent thing to do, if he really wanted to destroy all life, as he claims, would be to burn all of the towns and then simply wait for life to dwindle into nothing. But he doesn't do that. His actions are inconsistent and don't really make sense from the outside. His capriciousness still makes him a great villain, though, because the player gets the feeling that Kefka might do literally anything in the very next moment. Like Kefka, Thanos will do anything to achieve his goals, whether that means launching an interstellar war, maiming those who help him, or even torturing and murdering his own children. It's easy to see Kefka doing any of those things given the opportunity, but Thanos' plan for the death of half the universe's people is at least more internally consistent and orderly than anything Kefka does. Thanos believes that erasing half the life in the universe will save it, and he does take the most direct and orderly path towards that goal. From everyone else's perspective, however, Thanos' ends don't seem worthwhile or tenable in the long term. The sudden disappearance of half the universe's life is going to cause quite a few more problems than it solves. Moreover, if the couples of the universe raise an average of 4 children in the next generation or two, we're back exactly where we started. Thanos either hasn't thought that through, or simply plans on an endless succession of snaps, which is an even more disturbing thought. But as it did with Kefka, I think the illogical nature of Thanos' mission makes him a better villain, at least for the context of the movie in which he appears. If Thanos' plan were actually going to bring about utopia, many more people would be on his side. But because we know that Thanos is insane, and that his plan will only destroy things without solving any of the universe's fundamental problems, it makes him that much more terrible. The most important thing that Thanos has in common with Kefka, however, is that he's able to bring a diverse cast of protagonists to fight against him in a plausible way. The really compelling thing about Kefka is that he's always close to the events of the game. There are plenty of villains who direct their plans from off-screen through a variety of minions. Villains in the Elder Scrolls series tend to be like this. The player sees relatively little of Dagoth-Ur, Mankar-Camoran, and Alduin in their respective games, and when you do see them, it's at the end of the main storyline. And maybe that makes sense. Those games are all about choice and freedom, so the main villain can't be too compelling, or else the player won't really be able to carve out his or her own unique path. Kefka and the game he appears in are not like that. Kefka doesn't just order his minions to go do his work for him, even if that would be the sensible thing to do. Kefka personally poisons, personally burns, personally murders, and personally destroys the world. That's why it feels like the entire cast can genuinely be united against him. Almost every character has been personally affected. Thanos does the same thing. In the opening of the movie, we watch as Thanos personally murders Heimdall and then Loki. He sends others to attack the Earth at first, but he personally fights the Guardians of the Galaxy and even smugly toys with Star-Lord. He personally escorts Gamora into Nebula's torture chamber, and then kills Gamora with his own hands. He shows up personally to the battle in Wakanda, and then brings back Vision from the dead using the Time Stone, only to kill him again, and in an even more gruesome way. And last, but certainly not least, it's the snap of his fingers that wipes out half of all life in the universe. There's one glaring difference between Final Fantasy VI and Infinity War. The movie is incomplete. The second half of the story will be coming out this spring, and I'm certainly very eager to see it. But one of the things I want to know is if the parallels with Final Fantasy VI are going to continue. If they do, there are a few things I would expect from the next movie. In Final Fantasy VI, the second half of the game takes place after a world-shattering cataclysm. We already know the movie takes place after the snap, so that parallel does continue. In the second half of Final Fantasy VI, Kefka, who has been present in almost every major battle so far, suddenly hides in an almost unreachable place. At the end of Infinity War, Thanos has disappeared to who knows where, so that parallel also seems likely to continue. But what I'm most interested to see, at least from a structural perspective, is how Endgame is going to handle character stories. In the second half of Final Fantasy VI, the characters become separated from one another, and most of the quests are about each one of them finding their own personal reasons to keep going after the bad guy has won. If Avengers Endgame is to continue its parallels with Final Fantasy VI, we will probably see the team split up into small groups again, or even into some individual struggles. Each of the Avengers will have to come to grips with who they are, and the real reason why they fight. I realize it would be pretty hard for a single movie to focus on a dozen or more individual stories, but based on the trailer, it does look like there's some of that in there. But to find out for sure, we'll just have to wait and see. This series, The Game Design Extracts, is supported by Patreon. Backers of my Patreon get access to bonus videos, bonus articles, and access to the Game Design Forums Discord. To find out more about the books this series was based on, you can see my notes in the video description. Thanks for watching.